3:45 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. and we hope to climb up, as I said, to 11 by next fortnight. We'll stay at 11. We'll never have a seminar at 7, don't worry. Today's speaker is Dr. Chiranjib and the topic is the ethos of public management, reconsideration. Prior to joining the Azim Premji University, Chiranjib was Professor of Economics and Social Sciences in the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He was the founding chairperson of the Center for Public Policy at the same institution, and he's been associated with a number of academic institutions in India and abroad. What caught my eye was that he was also the first Indian to serve as president of the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, a network of Indian and Canadian higher education institutions. I'm sure today he will allude to the strains and stresses that public management as a profession faces the world over, but essentially he will speak about the ethos or spirit of public management in a democratic society. I've been told that it's very difficult to introduce people who are already known to the audience, so I've been minimalist in my approach. Chiranjib.
Give me a moment to get my machine going and then I'll... About 30-35 minutes. That is not really a full paper, in the sense it's not a completed paper, but it's based on a talk that I gave recently, and there was a conference. I wanted to talk about something a little different, and then I've been thinking about this particular issue of ethos for a long time. It's been on my mind. I knew one of those important issues that somehow I didn't feel confident enough to touch. Economists by training. And these questions take you into philosophy, take you into ethics and so on. So I've been keeping away from it. But I suppose coming to APU and in the company of many people who have a much more humanistic orientation than people have been used to, that encouraged me slightly. And then I also felt that the core issues actually may not be able to deal with them in a quote-unquote professional manner like a philosopher would, but at least these are so important and so basic that we at least talk about it. And I also feel that this question of ethos is very important, not only ethically but also instrumentally. The importance of public management. So I'm going to say a few things that are possibly sorry, there's something being configured in my as I was logging off, some new update has come. Anyway, so that's the purpose. I'm not going to talk about ethos, and I'm going to define what ethos is. But essentially, it's a little difficult to define very precisely. So I'll explain that. But ethos of what? So I had a choice. It could have been public management, it could have been civil service, it could have been bureaucrat, it could have been administrator. I thought about it and I felt that maybe management would be the least offensive. So I've taken that. But I'm using the term public management to mean all of these things. And they are actually intersecting terms. Really sorry about this, it's taking me so much time. But now I'm getting the welcome. So I have a little PowerPoint which I put together. I could talk without it, but since I made the PowerPoint, might as well do some justice to it. Whenever you feel like it, it's a very small gathering and common, and I'm hoping that your comments and suggestions will enable me to improve on what I have to say. Let me begin. Now, my interest in this subject has developed over a period of time because, I've been associated, as was mentioned, associated with teaching public policy and public management at IIM Bangalore. And I've been involved in this for quite a while, at least least a decade of actual teaching, and before that a little bit of preparation as well. And particularly I was involved in the implementation of the Government of India's new training policy, which is something that has been in practice now for about 8 months. For those of you who do not know, the Government of India has undertaken a major change, first to the IIS, and after that others are also following, of changing its training program, largely induced by the need to adapt the bureaucracy to changing times, which was actually begun with 1991. So that's the orientation, and they felt that the bureaucracy wasn't really ready to deal with the challenges that were coming. And in that new training policy, they have got now a series of what they call 5 phases of training, compulsory, out of which 3, 4 and 5 are actually mid-career, which is a very different from what used to happen earlier. And they're pretty serious, and they're reasonably long duration. And the government has spared no expense in actually putting it together. I was associated with phase 4, which was delivered in partnership with Maxwell School and housed in LBS, National Academy, for 3.5 years. 3 years fully, and then 1 last year I was partly there to start the new system. And essentially that program was for people who are going to become joint secretaries to government. Fairly senior people, about say 14 to 18 years of experience, and there are many others. It's a mixed group. Some of them are what they call original recruits, and some of people who have been promoted. Anyway, so that was my exposure to the whole issue. And our training program typically focused, as recommended by lots of experts, on skills, perspectives, analytical capability, a little bit of management techniques, and so forth. But really nothing on ethics, nothing on ethos, and it was always in passing. It was one of those things we hope that once the capability got built, we didn't have to worry about ethos. But right from day one, and even earlier in my interaction, it was obvious that the mood and spirit and how people feel about themselves and their whole cynicism about anything to do with civil service had really declined badly. And anything you tried to do just wasn't enough. It was like trying to light a fire in wet leaves. It just doesn't pick up. So it kept on that way, and there it was. And then I began to think about it. What can we do about it? And that's what made me think about this a little bit more crucially. I don't know what can come away. I need to emphasize that I don't have any special expertise in the subject of ethics or ethos or philosophy. But the advantage of that is that if you talk about something that you don't know, you can always learn from the audience. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I hope to learn from you. At least make I want you to share in the issue that we're talking about. Every discipline, every walk of life, every profession has an ethos, implicitly. And what is it? I was fortunate to find an interesting article by Hugh Heclo, a former professor at Harvard, who was giving an endowed lecture in the American Association of Public Administration or Political Science, whatever they call it. And he gave the title of his talk was the ethos, the spirit of public administration. So that helped me a lot, and in fact I've used quite a bit of his ideas. So much of these things that I'm talking about are not that original, and I mentioned where I got the idea. But ultimately the definition of ethos is it's the animating presupposition of a doctrine or of an institution. And therefore it has a transcendental quality. It signifies the essence of something. It motivates. It establishes a common identity in a profession. It reflects the calling of a profession. That is something you do from a deep inner motive, like a teacher has a calling, a deeper attitude, and it's not just a job, not a professional thing. And it goes beyond self-seeking and economic calculation. So it's not really an economic choice that dictates what it is. It's something basic, more fundamental, something that dealing with values. But it's very important. And in this I actually am using the word ethos in the same spirit that Max Weber uses the word in his Max Weber uses this term ethos in his work, well-known work, famous work on the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And it's in the same spirit. And what he says, of course, is that he says that it's a pretentious phrase, ethos, but it's difficult to define. It's a construct which must gradually be put together out of individual parts which are taken from historical reality. So you can't really say this is it, but look at different life stories, life histories. In fact, Weber himself paid a lot of attention to the biography of Benjamin Franklin when he developed the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And he was very clear when saying that, and I quote him, "Truly it is not simply a matter of making one's way in the world, but a particular ethic, peculiar ethic. The infraction of its rules is treated not as foolishness, but as forgetfulness of duty." And he goes on in this way. So that's the spirit in which I'm using the term. It's an ethical, it has an ethical connotation. Now, what is the ethos of public management? And if I follow Hecklo, the ethos of public management is actually basically what he calls the affirmation of the values inherent in the idea of the office and the office of being a public servant. And therefore it helps create what he calls a master ideal. It's obviously not true. Everybody doesn't follow that ideal, but it exists as a kind of a guide. And it's the basis of specific norms that are required in the light of that ideal. So it is really a statement of idealism. And in that sense, it is reminiscent, in fact, very, very similar to the idea of dharma in the Bhagavad Gita. And it's remarkable how close the idea of ethos actually is if you read it. And so what happens if it's transgressed? What happens if you violate it? Well, if you violate it, you can tell that something is missing. And Hecklo says that there are certain things that are naturally right. Actually, in his article, he gives an interesting idea about what is right. You don't have to say anything. He said, supposing you have a kitten and you come back from a day's work and the kitten comes rushing up and kneels in front of you, and suppose you give it one kick with your boots. Nobody's going to tell you that somehow you violated the ethos of how to deal with the pet. And so similarly, there are certain things that you don't have to say, but you know when it's missing. And he also gives the analogy that it's like a dead body. If the spirit goes away, it's a dead body. And in fact, this is exactly what you feel when you talk to people who are acting in a profession but are violating the professional ethics ethos on a regular basis. If you talk with them, they're very inert. They've got nothing to charge you up. And of course, it's a subjective statement, but we can have it for the sake of discussion. So it's not foolishness. It is forgetfulness of duty or a deviation from the path of righteousness. So that's what Weber says. And it's not just an ethical issue, it also weakens the functionality of the ethos. Ethos has a value, it's a purpose. Ethos is not without effectiveness. And in fact, if you look at, I can give many examples, but if you look at Weber and why he's quoting Benjamin Franklin, which is all about frugality, savings, building a reputation, etc., etc. Why it's good? Because if you do it, you'll be a better businessman. So it's not done for that reason, but there is a functional value. In Japanese, case of Japanese capitalism, Morishima has got a wonderful book called Why Has Japan Succeeded, in which he talks at length about the ethos of Japanese capitalism and talks about how it evolved its ethos from the pre-existing samurai system and translated that into the current times and how much it has helped them in being competitive in the global competition. So ethos is not just a ethical principle without any meaning, it has actually some value. Ethos evolves historically in relation to context. So it's not something completely static, it has to change. In fact, that's the problem. What happens is that the context shifts, and if the ethos doesn't adapt, yet maintaining its basic purpose, it becomes useless. So that's the problem. The essential features of ethos, of dharma, are more enduring. And again, you think about what Krishna has been telling Arjuna. It's exactly the same thing. The actual purpose of what people do changes. But there's some basic dharma that you have got to fulfill. And that's the point, that you must continuously adapt and re-establish the relevance of the ethos. And that won't automatically, obviously doesn't happen automatically. And ethos can collapse. So it's often under challenge and contestation. Even in the case of Weber's Protestant ethic, that was not the only value that was prevalent, even in America, about how capitalists should behave. It just turned out that was dominant. It originated in Massachusetts among the Protestants, among the small craftsmen and so forth, but it became kind of an idea. Whereas the capitalism spirit of the southern United States, which in many ways had more money, did not succeed. So even in the US, there was a contending ethos of capitalism. And so it doesn't mean that there is only one spirit of capitalism. And so the basic story is that it is challenged and it has to fight its way out. And in this discussion, when I'm talking about the civil service in a democratic society, principally India, but I'll also mention a little bit about the US as a comparison. Because the US actually is the foundation, is basically the place where public administration was redefined from the earlier Westminster mode. So not in Britain but in the United States actually, it actually was born. Anyway, if you look at Heckler, he then finally gives these 5 basic principles of public management. What he says is the ethos of public management. One is impartiality. So the public manager must act impartially. It must act with efficiency. They must be acting in a mode of disinterested rationality. They must be non-partisan. They must have some sense of democratic accountability, broadly defined. And by the way, these are not values that are completely, true in the absolute. They have to be interpreted in any terms, and they have to be ethically interpreted and carried out for a good purpose. So that is again not a rather fuzzy concept, but people would know what is a good purpose. And in fact, this is the struggle at any given time, particularly time of transition when the ethos is coming. So much of what I'm going to argue is, after talking about many other things, is that the real task today is to redefine these, because I think that these basic principles, I think that they go to the heart of the matter. And I'll also argue that there are many pressures that are operating today which are deviating, which are putting people away from this essential ethos, and that's causing the problem. And we don't have an answer yet, but we should work for an answer, and the teaching profession has an important role to play in giving the answer.
How does he distinguish between impartiality and non-partisanship?
Non-partisanship means political party. Which party?
Oh, political.
Political party.
Oh.
And impartiality is much more broadly. How do you, in a democratic country, it's a big challenge in India today even. How do you, but if you're going to be a public manager, you can, but by that I mean a career bureaucrat, you cannot but be, in some sense, non-partisan. You should be, yeah.
Sir, when you say non-partisanship is being apolitical in a sense, how would you, align it with democratic accountability?
Democratic accountability means that you should at least, be answerable to the people in the action. So what you're doing in the sphere of your work has to have some accountability. That's what I'm saying. So it doesn't mean that that you can't. You have to be partisan to do it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to the political dictate, but there's some accountability. For example, isn't Vinod Rai democratically accountable today? He is. In any given job, there will be a particular definition of what accountability means. In the case of the CAG, he has to be accountable to Parliament. And that's his job. Now, if he stops being accountable to him and then starts being accountable to somebody else, he will be not doing his job. So you have to interpret the meaning of democratic accountability. After all, you're operating in a democratic society. Now, if it was a kingdom, if it was a Mughal bureaucracy, then I think your attitude will be different. There's no question of being accountable to the people in that context. It will have to be redefined in a different way. But here, in every different context, what does it mean for a bureaucrat to be democratically accountable? So that's anyway, these are all fuzzy concepts. I haven't thought through the content of what it might mean. In fact, I'm saying in the paper that we should let's work together to define what each of these pillars mean today. I think that people have to work through it to figure it out. Anyway, in sum, therefore, if you were to sum it up, it's basically the dharma or ideal role of the public manager, and that is the stewardship of the public interest. You know, one big difference between the public manager and the private manager is that the private manager cannot escape the collective nature of the work. It is ultimately there's a collective responsibility that stakeholders are collective. Whereas in a company, even though in principle there are shareholders and so forth, ultimately in a company you have a much more direct, easily understood lines of authority and lines of functioning who we respect to. The bottom line is very clearly defined. But in public management that is not so. And it is I think ultimately at the end of the day, you are the person whose very, very important role in making sure that the public interest is protected. And of course, what is the public interest, how do you define it, etc. is an issue. We can talk about that. And this, however, has to be done in a spirit of service, avoiding the pitfalls of arrogance, self-righteousness, elitism. And therefore, it's a knife edge requiring delicate balance. What struck me was, a lot of people think that this is a problem of India and the IIS. They are supposed to be arrogant, they are supposed to be self-righteous, elitist, etc. But this is written by, I'm taking the idea from Ethos. And so it's obviously a more generic problem that the public office actually carries with it some power, and therefore these characteristics tend to show up in different kinds of contexts. Now, we'll talk about a little bit comparatively what exactly happened in the United States. And it's an interesting insight as to how certain dramas get played out in different times of history. But the underlying story is not that different. In what happened there was that the public administration was reborn, actually, born properly after the Great Depression and the Second World War, in the time of Franklin Roosevelt. So you talk about, when you read the American literature, it really starts at that time. Some of the giants, like John Gauss himself, whose memorial lecture it was, and some of the other big later giants like Appleby and all that, many of them came from that time, many of them came from Midwestern, ethical kind of religious backgrounds and so forth. And they all felt that what needed right now was giving good governance and creating good citizenship. You have to understand the mood of the time. The war is over, and the mixed economy is being born and so forth. And according to historical account, what happened over there was ultimately this good governance, etc., got embodied in the task of planning. Even the United States, it was planning, and which became a kind of rationalizing project. So under Roosevelt, much effort at having an activist state came into being, and creating a planning and rational decision making, Tennessee Valley Authority, all the New Deal and all that stuff, national forests, all of that became part of planning. And this, however, lasted only a short while, maybe a decade and a half. After that, it actually got routed by opposition in the United States. Two things happened. One was, I forget the exact act, which year it was, but there was a major act of Congress which really clipped the wings of bureaucracy by legislation and put them in their place, because many of them felt that they were getting a little bit too assertive. So that's the political opposition to a overly activist, planning-oriented civil service. And then, of course, it got attacked by a whole host of intellectuals. For example, James Q. Wilson, who's a very famous name, wrote the book Bureaucracy, who came to Harvard, actually replacement for John Gauss in that same position. At that time, there was to teach a course called Bureaucracy, and that changed. And so Wilson and others began to interpret bureaucracy in terms of selfish reaction to selfish behavior. So all these other concerns, and much of the research was showing that all of these collectivist ideas were not really working. American cooperatives were failing, blah blah. So basically, there was an anti-collectivist reaction from the intellectuals, and of course, the economic plate, Hayek also had a role to play in terms of pushing ahead the free market view. So essentially, it collapsed in the United States, or got weakened in the US. And that's why Americans, if you talk about planning, etc., they all instantly reject it because they have been through this history and they've seen it in a particular way. But the lesson that should be drawn from this is that ethos can be weakened, but it is not identical to any kind of particular project or doctrine. So the principles of public management we talked about, they were much broader, much bigger, much larger issues of stewardship of public interest. They need not be rise and fall with a particular rationalizing project. I'm mentioning this because in our country as well, this has a resonance because we had a certain definition of the role of government, but then that's gone. But that doesn't mean that government should lie over and roll over and play dead, because you have to redefine its meaning. And this is not going to be uniquely Indian. This is a task that's happening continuously all the time. And so that's the main point. And I thought it was quite interesting that in a country as different as America, some kind of parallel scenarios would get acted out. In fact, there are some very interesting works by Hirschman, etc., on this whole oscillation between public interest and private interest. As it seems to circulate, go up and down over time. Anyway, that's a different matter. Okay, now in India, what's happening? And I won't get into the details, but just to tell you that the two major global trends have played a big impact. Trend number one is adoption of market reform policies, and for example, and what has come to be called the Washington Consensus policy paradigm. And the Washington Consensus is so called because it represented the unified views of the World Bank, the IMF, and the US Treasury during the 80s, when they tried to advise third world countries as to what they should do. So it became a template of good policy making, which became the condition on which they would give lend more money. And it was a reaction to several episodes of financial crisis, notably Mexico and other things that were beginning to show up the instability of a world economy, which was increasingly becoming dependent on private finance. So the banks got into trouble in these countries, and therefore the government of India, the United States government had to bail them out and so forth. So they were very concerned. So in some sense, I don't want to spend too much time on it, it is governed ultimately by the change scenario where finance capital is getting the upper hand, and it's a transition point. They want the governments to act differently. The same World Bank 5 years ago would have strongly supported state-run thing, and they themselves have been giving long-term loans to India. But basically, the Washington Consensus policies, which serves as the template for our reform and many other reforms, was an important element in this thing, in what changed the scenario for these people. The second part is also a foreign thing, not as powerful in India in terms of actual impact, but still it animates a lot of our thinking of public administration reforms, is the so-called new public management. So that was another big movement on the administration side, and that is what governs the basic strategy of administrative reforms in all the liberal market economies. For example, UK, New Zealand, Australia, America, Canada, and it has also affected the so-called coordinated market economies, but not with that much effect. That is the continental Europe, Japan, and other places. But it's clearly the dominant paradigm. And this, Al Gore, for example, was the head of that first committee report, which talked about government better government for less money and so forth. Anyway, so there's a whole tradition of reform that is taking place. It was backed by Margaret Thatcher, and it influences our thinking in our country quite a bit. In fact, if you look at the Molly Commission report and other things that have been said about public management reform, you will find that the embryonic, some of the core ideas have not emanated. And there's some basic principles, and you don't get into it. Efficiency is one of them. It has an impact on the public management in a few ways. In the case of the Washington Consensus policies, what has happened is that they have been ultimately, we are told to create market-friendly state, and therefore this means less government interference in markets, promoting markets and using market incentives, adoption of a facilitating function towards private enterprise, New priorities are being set, for example, fiscal discipline. And since 1991, it has been the foundation of the reform process. I don't want to get into the details of it, but that's not relevant now. What impact did it have on public management, the ethos of public management? It had a very strong impact in terms of how what happened was that, first of all, there was a tremendous, trenchant, all-round criticism about against the bureaucracy in India. It began probably in the late mid-80s on, but it became a crescendo and it was going on. And from different quarters, bureaucracy had been severe attack. From the World Bank, from the IMF, international press. All you have to do is to read the May 1991, there was an economist reform survey of India, which is I always ask my students to read it, because that tells you the summary of the situation as it was seen at the eve of Narasimha Rao's election. But if you read it, you will see certain characteristics, how India is being portrayed. And you see that the common villain is the Babu. The common villain is the bureaucrat. And with all the different criticisms that we are familiar with. What is very interesting is that I say actually deliberately, all the criticism about government failure, of which there was many, have been deflected towards the bureaucracy by interests. They generally definitely want a bureaucracy out of the way. So you don't get an attack on the politician. Very rarely will you find an attack on the politician, even in some of these Western financial press or on the World Bank. But the bureaucrat is always blamed. CII, FICCI, they also have policy documents and all these things. You won't find them, ever blaming the politician. Even, I don't know, I haven't followed the literature, but I don't know how many people really went after Mamata Banerjee in a big way after, what happened in West Bengal, in Singapore. Okay. So what I'm saying is that somehow there is an effort to not criticize, or even if it's in the interest of short-term interest, the politician. But there's always a kind of an attack on the civil service. And of course there was much damage to the self-image of the civil servant. And some of it was caused by salary differentials between them and their friends in the private sector, with whom they started out at the same time. Both of us were sensitive, how come you're earning 10 times more than me, kind of thing. So that kind of feeling, and it's there in some of the references that I give. That feeling is very strong. In fact, if you talk to them, that's what they tell you. I go out with my family, go shopping with some of the students, participants in some of the executive programs told me, I go out in Delhi, I live in Delhi, sir. I go out for a walk with my family. My son goes and looks at the shop, and he wants to buy this thing. You can't buy it. You can't buy it. It's hard. Another colleague of my friend of mine, actually, he was a classmate, he became an IS officer. He was Maharashtra Carter. Being an IS officer, he lived in a very, very wonderful colony in Bombay. And of course, you can imagine who the neighbors of the children will be living in that colony. And the amount of pocket money that some of the neighbors' children had was probably more than my friend's salary. So this kind of thing, has had a tremendous impact, and our research has not been able to transcend this. I'm giving you an extreme case, but something like that has happened. Then, of course, more importantly, confusion about the role of government. They got confused. There's so much bombardment as to what you should do. They don't know. Paralysis, I would say, in the face of negative fallout of accelerated growth. Lots of negative things are happening. Lakes are drying up around us, literally. And environmental damage, water resources falling, urban chaos, many things are happening, and where you need some kind of corrective mechanism, but today they are paralyzed. Civil service is not in black. Partly their work has been made difficult, but they also cannot independently act. They can't take a stand, because, and they don't. So that is I would say, in a way, you're violating the ethos for which you're there. And they're in a reactive mode, and therefore they can't play any kind of forward-looking strategic role, stewardship role, with respect to natural resources management and any other things. actually, if you look at the content of the Washington Consensus policies, you'll say government should do this, government should do that, government should do this, that. They will never say government should make policy. Civil servant should not make policy. That part, policy, what I'm saying is that policy competence we develop is not a part of what is recommended in terms of, it's much more facilitation and so on. Anyway, and the other thing that's happened is that there's a divide being created within the civil service, volunteer services, between the pro-reform and the anti-reform elements. And obviously the pro-reform people have been sort of upgraded, their role has been recognized more and the others have not. So that these are some structural changes that have affected the ethos. Similarly, the new public management, I won't talk too much about it, but you know, they were inspired by the business management model. They wanted to fix government by copying what is done in the private sector. And of course, efficiency and so forth was important. But one of the things that was very, very important that happened, even in England, was that the basis of accountability got shifted. And accountability and responsiveness got redefined, even in Thatcher's Britain, compared to others. What happened was that earlier, just like India, you know, the autonomy was protected, of the civil service was protected by the Constitution. The Constitution was a major force. So that got weakened. And the hierarchical command system of the administration, that also got weakened. What actually happened was, even in England, was that the political executives, the politicians became much more important. And the civil servants were told, look, you must do what they're saying because the politicians now want to deliver. You see, the economy, the government must do more. Who will do it? The politician will do it, and you must be accountable to it. So this idea of responsiveness, not to anything abstract, not to be a senior, not stand by the Constitution, but all that got weakened. And that was an important thing. Even then, we have something parallel happening here also. Then we had the inclusion of market ideology in government processes, and as a result of which I would argue that they become weaker in their ability to play a balancing role. I mean, they don't know. They get all confused. So anything that actually may require some challenging of the market outcome is now much more difficult. Okay, now what has happened in India? I want to give a quick thing of the cost of public management in India, focusing on the volunteer services. Current status is that it's in severe crisis, as far as ethos is concerned. Absolutely severe crisis. But the broad role, how has it changed in their self-image historically? I think if you look at, I've read some material, basically other civil servants, what they've written about their experience, history, life, etc., and how they view their profession. What's happened is that they've changed from what they thought themselves as a ruler to guardian. So that the Indian civil service was the transition from the ruler to the guardian. So they had a very guardian kind of a role, giant figures and so on and so forth. So that was the first. Then after independence, you had the planning era under Nehru. There, nation building became the major purpose under the era of planning, under Nehru and Sardar Patel. Sardar Patel was very important in the bureaucracy. You see, he was the person under whom the bureaucracy functioned. And then, of course, we now have this particular period. If you read the literature on what important civil servants feel about what they were doing, you find that these are what they say. What they say is that the dominant value system in the planning era in the beginning used to be these things: integrity, political neutrality, courage, high morale. Now, today it sounds almost like how can we say these things? But that's what someone like Vittal, who was Finance Secretary of Andhra Pradesh, and may have had some role in the government of India as well, but important civil servant, that is what he says. And you notice that these are all non-market values. Integrity, political neutrality, courage, high morale. And he said that he remembers that people, aspirants, would come for the jobs. Who wants to be a civil servant? Why do you want to be a civil servant? You are attracted by the desire to serve, by the variety of work opportunities that are provided in the civil service, and by the trappings of power. yes, there's some amount of, a little bit of urge to power is there, but otherwise, this is what they were looking for, and this is reasonably consistent with what we would have called the ethos. You can function, do a good job. Now, compared to that, and what were the main pillars supporting the functioning? Two important things. One is the discipline of the service. You can't have a pillar bureaucracy, which is an administrative machine, functioning without discipline. So you actually need it. And later on we can see how that got eroded in different parts. And the other is that the authority is derived from the Constitution. So that's the other part. And if you read, these are important civil servants, NC Saxena, K.N. Session, and also K.P. Krishnan, who's a much younger man, but he's got a very interesting article together with Somanathan in that Devesh Kapoor and Pratap Mehta edited book. It's a very, very interesting chapter on the civil service. So you will find that some of these ethos destroying relevant characteristics may be noted from what they are saying. I'm not saying this is people like Saxena and others are saying this. What are they saying today? Low motivation and low morale, not innovative and enterprising, low level of accountability, not democratic, rising incidence of corruption in the all India services, alienation from the public, hostility towards poor sections, basic lack of character, according to K.N. Session, link between politicians and the business class. And then Rajiv Gandhi had something pretty nasty to say already in the 1980s. So you can see how this has been evolving over time. Let me just tell you what is it that Rajiv Gandhi said. They have no feeling for the public cause. They have no involvement in the future of the nation. No comprehension of national goals. No commitment to the values of modern India. This is Rajiv Gandhi's depiction of the state of Indian bureaucracy. When I think in the mid-80s he made a French remark. So you can see that even by the mid-80s what has happened. So this is the situation, and so therefore we have to agree that there is a real crisis of ethos in the civil service, in spite of all the other positives that the way they've evolved and so forth. Now the question therefore is, why did it happen? What are the reasons? And here are some reasons that again from the literature that I'm suggesting, which I think I agree with them. One, of course, is that since the 1980s, what happened was they wanted to sort of give them a little bit more stimulus, and they tried to attract better people to the service and converted this into a career. So careerist motivations were injected into the civil service in the mid-80s in an effort to professionalize them. And that may not be the only thing, but it certainly played a role in converting their attitude from calling to career. That it's a career like anything else. Don't be an engineer, be a civil servant, that kind of this thing. Don't be a doctor, be a civil servant. So that kind of thing came. And so they also developed an attitude, interest in exploiting the power of the state. So when you start talking about career, when you start talking about personal gain, a selfish thing gets injected, and many of them began to consider getting the benefit out of it. That's one. Secondly, this I mentioned already, the economic status of the All India Service relative to their business managers. Then the other thing that is also interesting is, within the service, you observe in the 1980s and 90s, there is a now perverse ranking that All India Service officers themselves put, particularly IIMs, on how their colleagues are doing, how they are doing. And so they have, theoretically there is no difference between any kind of government functioning. But in practice, they think that if you're in the economic ministries, industry or commerce department, then you're superior to other departments. Home, establishment finance is better. Still better because at least it's got clout, power, and so forth. But they are both are superior to the tribe. Anybody doing anything to do with the poor. So tribal welfare and social welfare, land reforms, urban slums, rural development, they are the bottom of the heap. In terms of internal classification as to what is supposed to be success. So that shows that there is a deep sociological transition that's taking place in the service in how they're identifying their role. And you can see that they are being wanting to identify with the rich, identify with the successful, glamorous, and so forth, and they don't consider the developmental function as particularly important. Though, in actual definition, the development function will continue to be quite important in India. So that's being devalued. And this is clearly having an impact on the stewardship function of the state. Because if you feel this way, then you're not motivated. And only the rare civil servant, the unusual civil servant, and you can count them, Vijay Kumar in Andhra Pradesh, and then in group, and a few others who really have gone out of their way. The other gentleman who was working on Panchayat Raj in Kerala. So that's it's not a medium. Then the other thing is, other argument that there are some structural changes which says that there is a lot of recruitment in the civil service, and so your chances of being a top secretary is very more and more. So the plum posts are very few, and you're all under competition, and you don't have any other thing to live for except a high position, and success is defined that way. So you engage in cutthroat competition. So that is another feature. I could give you a few more features, but it's not essential to the whole thing. But there are some structural features that are creating this. The other factor that is meant is that there has generally been a declining standard of professionalism in the service. And this is Saxena points this out. He says that people don't want to read anymore. They get a job, and after recruitment they stop reading. Whereas the earlier model of the scholar bureaucrat was an Indian, very enduring model. People really respected them because they were scholarly. They knew what they were. A typical ICS officer of the olden days, you saw them. The man was a scholar. He was a learned person. He knew what he was talking about. That has totally gone because people don't like to read. Similarly, now they're scared to give frank and free advice to ministers or anybody because of the repercussions. They are become incapable of handling new and complex problems. So technical deficiencies in their competence. There's a declining the work style. What are they working for? Do they really care for output, or are they acting in such a way that they can maximize their status? And Saxena says they're trying to act in such a way that they position themselves, give the appearance of doing a lot of work, but basically it's glamour seeking and status seeking work that they're doing. And emergence of new values, that is political loyalty, flexibility. So trying to win through that method, through political alignment. It's not uniformly successful because the more unstable the governments are, less reliable this channel is, but basically that's going on. And of course the other part which is very important is that the negative impact of the current political culture, that cannot be overemphasized, which is that the respect for the rule of law and casteism, corruption and criminalization has become a part of the present political culture. And that is, many people argue that once this is that in such a deep way, it's almost impossible to insulate the bureaucracy from that kind of reality. And that's the assessment of many of them. There is a very interesting case study, some of you may have read by P.S. Appu a few years ago. He passed away recently, a few months ago. A very well-known civil servant, a man of great principle, who resigned when he was director of the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy, because when he caught somebody doing something illegal, he was overdue. So he said, hell with you, and he left the service. He came and settled in Bangalore. So a man of great. So anyway, he written a book about nasty title like Decline and Debasement of the All India Services, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, it's from his personal experience of what happened in Bihar. And if you read it, actually it's a live case study of how it declined. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the process is very clear. Essentially what happens is, the hierarchy thing is broken. The ministers don't listen to, don't obey rules, and then they go and do whatever they want on postings and transfers. Officers realize what's going on and they take bribes to get the posts. We're talking about the higher level. Populism and loss of financial discipline, loss of organizational discipline, powerless chief secretary and even CM, because he was at that time finance secretary and he was briefly CM in Bihar. He went to CM, told him, I want to do something, please do something, I'll do it, but ultimately saying, sorry, I can't, because the unstable government, he wants to survive. So, etc. So he squarely blames this process in what happened. But he also blames the service also by saying that, look, they can't stand up for their values. And he mentions the emergency period and what happened and so forth as an important reason. So that's an interesting case study. And thus, to summarize, if you look at the whole story of decline, you have to see that it's a function of market ideology, caste careerist opportunism, and political culture. These are the three major factors that are operating to break it down. So now the question is, what can be done? And here I will actually want to listen to you a little bit more and tell you some things that I think are maybe worth trying. But let me divide it into three parts. What I want to say. You have to reclaim. If you want to have good governance, it has to be reclaimed. But it won't be done easily. It will be resisted by the business interest and political classes. They will hand it over. They won't want you to become the custodian of public value interests. So that's a problem. And it is difficult to find. However, it is difficult to find a new compatible ethos that you can learn from in modern capitalism. Because modern capitalism today, if you're looking for that, it will not be able to offer you any moral thing at all. And here I refer to the work of Richard Sennett, Robert Putnam and Michael Sandel. This man is these two are, I think, sociologists, political scientists, and the last one is a philosopher. And they have recently, well, not so recently, but Sandel is very recent, writing trenchant critiques of what is happening to morality and society in modern day capitalism. Essentially what's going on is that Weber's spirit of capitalism is long dead. In Weber's capitalism there was a positive ethos, definitely there was a positive ethos, frugality, hard work, honesty, these were all laid out. But today you don't have that. So actually today's Silicon Valley capitalism together with Wall Street capitalism, that is the combo, doesn't have any kind of humanistic ethos. In fact, it's acting as a negative force in the entire American and Western society. And and some of you have read Richard Sennett. Richard Sennett's got a book, very interesting book called The Culture of the New Capitalism. And basically, he's a sociologist. He's done, data collection on how people feel about it in the United States. Two things he says, which is interesting. One is he said that the bureaucracy actually played a very important role in cementing society in the period of Industrial Revolution, which I was surprised. What he says was that Marx had predicted that alienation is bound to undercut capitalism. People are going to come from the rural areas, they're going to come to the cities, they will have no feudal base, everything they stood for will be dissolved, melts into air. He says, like, all that is solid melts into air. It's a word that Marx used. It's a phrase I never forgot. It's very true. Things that seem so lasting under feudalism collapse very quickly under the thrust of market commercialization. So in that situation, what he says was Bismarck was very brilliant in understanding that you could take the principle of the army and bring it into the civil service. Because the army gave an alienated society a structure. It gave relationships. It gave lifelong career path. It gave you an identity. You were no longer a villager. You came, you were some officer. So it gave a new identity, and that was stabilizing. So Bismarck then said, why not I do it in bureaucracy? That's why the Prussian bureaucracy, etc., was constructed along the lines of the army. And it played a stabilizing role, and Sennett actually argues that it played a role in stability. It was copied by businesses. Large companies copied the bureaucratic structure, including later on American companies. The IBM song and all that. General Motors, people, they were all trying to have this real army building almost. That had a lifelong stabilizing character and therefore gave a moral force to the capitalism and prevented it going the revolutionary road. That's Sennett's argument. But he has gone and done research in Silicon Valley in the modern times where those companies have broken down, But while work things are, stay home and work and much more casualized labor, a much more easy approach to success and failure, no commitment to any organization, you hop from job to job, blah, blah. He studied their culture, they're actually alien. And he paints a kind of a negative thing about what the psychological impact of this kind of structural change. So that's Senate. Robert Putnam, of course, you will know, he's done some work on social capital, but one American culture, he wrote this book called Bowling Alone, and maybe he's written another book afterwards. Bowling alone, as the name suggests, people go for bowling as a cultural activity. It's a solidarity building thing of social capital. But he says that Americans have become so individualized that now people go bowling alone. So what he's saying is that's breaking down. What is Michael Sandel saying? Michael Sandel is saying, look, in every single thing, he's got two books. One is called The Moral Limits of Markets, I think, and the other is called Justice. Both are very readable for the general public to read. But the basic argument about markets, what he's saying is, and you see it in India as well, is that the market is being pushed into every conceivable opportunity, every place. For example, one example he gives is that your friend invites you to the best man at his wedding. There you're supposed to propose a toast, and there you're supposed to say, what you feel about it. Supposing, and they actually do it. Supposing you buy the toast. Okay. What does it mean in human terms? He's expecting some human value from you, but you go and buy the book and you read out a written speech which you purchase from somewhere. And so he's arguing that in many situations we've reached a point where if you try to transact these things with the market, you're basically devaluing the whole activity. In many situations, and he gives examples in terms of I don't know, wherever there is virtue, sympathy, generosity, honor, thoughtfulness, attentiveness, all of these things have an intrinsic value. If you try to marketize them, they get destroyed. So, the basic argument I'm going to be giving is a little bit of aside, practicing a little ideology here. But essentially saying that you can't find any kind of uplifting ethos for the public manager to copy from the market, is my main point. And in fact, as these things become stronger, it goes contrary to the public ethos even more, is my argument. So what do you do? So I want to say that I think there are three things that can be done, and I'll just leave it pretty quickly on this, and we can talk about it. One is that public policy education can play a role. And as educators, I think we do have a role to play in this restructuring and of these ethos. The second thing is that I think the public managers themselves, in their own sphere of influence, they can try to do some things. And third is that there are some structural changes that this government of India can bring about, which can help the process. And the last part I've been very, very minimal, because those changes usually don't happen in a big way. But the other two, what can we do? What can we help? Public policy education, by the way, has come to stay even in India. And over the last 10 years, many places are now having policies in public policy, courses in public policy, and public management. And it's people who are actually not mid-career are also taking these courses. Now, what can we do? And I think that here I would say that we can introduce certain types of courses on this theme. So I'm arguing that professionalism is important, but I would still argue that we need to have courses that emphasize the ethical and institutional foundations of public service. There isn't anything. If you understand what kind of people are coming to the civil service, many of them are engineers. And they have hardly any background in the humanities, or philosophy, or history, or politics, etc. So I would say that we need courses on ethics of public management and attitudes. We will develop avoidance of arrogance, elitism, self-righteousness. These have to be discussed. And nobody's there to tell them really. They don't tell that in Nalbadu Shastri, they don't. They're much more into that you're the best, you've been selected, you're the, that kind of thing is much more being emphasized. But this is, to my best of my knowledge, not there. Then they need some historical understanding the evolution of public management in India. Otherwise, they don't know what's happening, what are they doing, what's the profession, how it's evolving over time. What I'm describing right now, very few people have an actual critical discussion on it. It's necessary. Third, and not only in India, elsewhere as well, globally, what is the social relevance of public management today? Is it relevant? Should we shut down? Should we all, have agencies like New Zealand tried out for a while? They closed down career departments, and then they said BWSSB is an agency. It will have an advertise for anybody who can apply and be the CEO of BWSSB for 5 years and has to deliver the job. That was the New Zealand model. So should we do that? What do we need? So we need to understand these things. And then of course I argue very strongly that you need a multidisciplinary approach. So deeper study of sociology, philosophy, politics is very, very crucial in these people. So if you get a chance to teach them, you should. And you will be going against the grain if you try to do these things. But you must integrate it in a proper way. You can't have just some silos, but you have to integrate. Then I would say that you need a deeper understanding of the public interest. It comes out very casually. I mean, I've been teaching for many years. We both mentioned it. The actual operating model of public interest is very vague. I actually find out on what basis people decide what is in the public interest. In fact, if you read the literature on, say, a new policy like the competition policy, I did a paper with Anil Suraj on evolution of regulatory institutions in India. There I had read some of these things, and it was very interesting that what kind of court cases were fought, what were the arguments that were being given. You see, what happens is that what was considered good yesterday, today has become bad. And people just don't know how to resolve it. In the case that we discussed, other people on other people's research on MRTPC's evolution, MRTPC suddenly started supporting some companies who wanted them to, protect against imports. After the economic reform, and then obviously court case. Eventually, MRTPC lost, but the arguments that are given is very interesting. The MRTPC chairman or the etc. gave the argument: look, our job is to protect Indian jobs. That's what we are supposed to, civil service is supposed to do. The judge said, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. Competition is supposed to help the consumer. So competition is better. And then understanding of law and economics applied to this issue, possibilities and limitations of markets for achieving public interest and so forth. And then in this context, therefore, we should, if you take seriously those 5 things, impartiality, efficiency, listen to rationality, etc., we need to use case studies and to highlight the nuances, the contradictory claims, and instead how do you find out what's right in this thing? How do you create a situation? How should you interpret these things today? That can only be done in a mode of studying through cases and thinking about it, and this is not an answer. So I would say I was actually influenced by this David Ward, who came and spoke over here, and his paper on what is education for. And I think that he's got a point there when he says that some basic biases have to be corrected. And these biases are that you have to emphasize values over theories. I mean, not only theories. Correct the balance. Right now, a lot of emphasis on theories. Abstraction versus consciousness. He said consciousness is important. You must make you think about it. He says answers versus questions. Yes, it's important to have answers, but questions are also important. People must come out with a questioning mind. Ideology and efficiency are important. What about conscience? So these ideas can be inculcated into, a kind of if you really want to have a serious training teaching for these people, you've got to do it. Otherwise, they will not be able to understand the inherent linkage of things. Because what actually happens if you look at these things is that there's a fragmentation of logic. Certain kinds of ideas get elevated vis-a-vis others. So today, what you're elevating is profitability in the name of efficiency. And by elevating that and not really giving any attention to the others, you are creating a decision which is saying it's okay. And so you need people who are custodians of the public interest to engage in this question and not swallow the currently prevalent decision pattern. Is it a final answer? No, it's not. It's an appeal to deepen thinking which is at the moment sorely lacking, is what I would say. What can public managers do? Here I want to make a big point. I'm governed by Parthu's book, Parthu Chiranjib's book on the politics of the government, and it's not an idea that completely new. But basically, we have to understand that the Indian society and polity is being splintered in a two-way manner. There is a duality that is going on. There is an urban, middle-class world. Some of the big metros and some of the other big towns and the rich people there, let's say about 200 million people at the most or something like that, is one world. And then there is the rest of them, another 800 million people who are another world. And these two worlds are not operating by the same rules. And what should government do? That's my question. In these two worlds. The first world that I described, that is actually approximating, according to Parthu, towards bourgeois democracy in the process of world evolution. You can see around us. Active civil society and so on and so forth are coming up, many new voices. So it's not what it was in 1960. Urban India is not what it was in 1960. It's a different world and it's emerging and it's becoming closer to other developed democracies. But they're not alone. They're surviving in another world of informal sector, and if you read any documentation, you see the numbers. And that informal sector, their survival, etc., is completely dependent upon breaking the law. In the other bourgeois democracy world, you want to establish rules, you want to establish regulations, you want to have rule of law, you want to, etc. That's the way we are moving. If you look at the movements, etc., that's the way we are moving. Lower corruption, etc., etc. That's the way evolution. But what about this other world? What about the informal sector? What about the vendors? What about the traders? What about the all the other people living in the peri-urban areas? Partha argues they cannot survive without bribery, corruption, without bending rules, asking for special favors. So there is, as long as this condition continues, you cannot have the same kind of rules. So what do I deduce from that? What I'm trying to basically argue is, I don't know if we need two different services, because then there will be classification. But I think that the civil service must be made to understand that there are two different worlds in which they have to function, both equally important. Perhaps the second one is more important in my view than the first one, and they have to be able to face it. What model is there? And basically, I'm just in a shortcut element. The model that I think for the first world is the model of what I call embedded autonomy. I don't call it. It's the term that was used in relation to why did Japan succeed by the. Essentially, what it means is that the civil servant in our country will not become totally distant. It's very far from that. They will be a part of it, but they must be able to link up with these guys. At the moment, our civil service is socially alienated. They're still, they stick out like sore thumbs. I find that basically I find many civil servants, at the more senior they become, the more difficult it is to talk with them. I wait for them to retire, then they become more. You see that repeatedly, because the most difficult time is when they're secretary. But then it's a matter of only a month or two. Then after that, they become human again. So what this means is that the functioning civil servant is actually deeply alienated by the virtue of when he is. He'll be there with that look and you can't even approach the person. So that has to be broken. And that has to be broken by building bridges laterally in society. And there are strategies for that, there are cultures for that. The more consultative, more this thing. That's something I've been preaching for quite a while as to how to go about it, and it requires a cultural shift. But they must communicate more with intellectuals and academics. They must communicate more with NGOs and other civil society people. They must stop hating the judiciary, which they currently do, etc. So that is a kind of a different kind of engagement. So you must learn to engage in that world, and you can't be completely separate. You can't be alienated, and you can't only communicate with the politician. You have to work with the journalists, with their other crowd. So that's one method. What about the other one? What kind of work can the civil servant do to facilitate the people in the rural areas, people in the small towns? Actually, when they're young, early in their career, they do quite a bit of work. They're very important. But if you look at some of the, and I read this interesting biographical piece by a former person in the Phase 4, Sumita Daura, or poor but spirited in Karimnagar. She described the 7 or 8 years that she was a district collector or whatever it is in Andhra Pradesh, Karimnagar, poor district area. And it's interesting what they do. They can do a lot, but the model there, I would call it embedded collaboration. It's a term I've just coined. But essentially what it means is that in that place, unless the civil servant plays the role of a fulcrum, which is actually unifying the silos of government action, which is putting things together, which is actually learning much more deeply about the problems of the poor, building empathy for the poor, not being the my bap kind of that's the model. You have to break that model. They have to merge with that. And it's not that it hasn't happened. The ACRP model in Andhra Pradesh is a good example of the spirit of this thing. And so that's what I think we should do. We should have a model of training these people to play the role of what I'm calling the embedded collaborative management, because they have to manage, they have to collaborate, they have to get people together, they have got to solve the problem. They must solve the problems at the ground. And for that, they have to be empowered, they should be, otherwise it's useless. So that's the thing. Now the question that is in my mind, don't have an answer, is whether the same service can do both. Sometimes I think that you should break up the IAS and have one service for the industry and commerce, etc., and one particular service for people who want to work in development. But then if you do that in our country, what will happen is they will say that this is the superior service, this is the junior service. So you have to change it. But that's the basic point that I wanted to make about what this is what I'm saying, what the government does. This is the work the civil servants must themselves do. They must make an effort. And as long as they to learn these two models and not be, so they must find allies and etc. You see the main point I'm making. Otherwise, finally, what can government do? I won't have too much to say, but what the government certainly can do is they can reset the priority of government work from only growth to social and economic development. Right now, the orientation is terribly overemphasis on growth. They have to reset the internal professional priority. They must do whatever possible to give enough adequate recognition and status to those people who are working in social and economic development. They must therefore reset this implicit ranking that's happening, do whatever is necessary to change that. Then I also say they must therefore also stimulate professional growth in these subjects, because right now what's happening is many sincere IAS officers are trying to break out of this thing by going and becoming professional. There are some sincere people. K. Krishnan, who came here, who's one good example. He's one of the best civil servants I've come across. He wants to be professional. He's very bright. He took the CAT exam. He did the like anybody else, sat in class with people 20 years younger than him, or 15 years younger than him. Then he did his doctoral thesis, and then he went back to the service. Now, what he's trying to do is to attain professional competence. But what did he choose? He chose infrastructure finance, kind of a topic. So so those who are trying to get this professional recognition, they are eyeing only the economic services. Good managers of finance, they must understand infrastructure financing, they must, etc. Technical knowledge in these fields is what they want. But comparably, I don't see any kind of playing out of the other side. That is, we need to have much more of a stronger orientation and learning on how to be a good development administrator. There may have been there something earlier, but I think that has to be stepped up. And that's my main point. The government should support this. The government should support programs and studies in disaster management, livelihoods, and create professional development in these fields, because it's necessary. And of course, they have to give more flexibility and autonomy for people working in the areas. That has to be done, otherwise they can't do that job. And they must also, many this one could give, but I think minimally they should at least address the ethos destroying short tenure, politically motivated transfers. Because unless, the service, you're not dealing with salvos here, you're dealing with people who are having a career. So you can't ignore that totally. So minimally at least, follow the rules. And stop this nonsense of someone who will be in situation where they can only be for 6 months in one position. The average position of somebody in Haryana, I don't know, maybe 6 months or something in any post. That has to stop. And therefore the government of India can actually intervene in this. The other part, suggestion made by H.C. Saxena is modify the secrecy rules to allow engagement in policy debates by public management. Let them publish. Let them publish. Let them talk freely. Don't break them down. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say on this thing. And if you have any suggestions, I'd be very happy to engage. So I take a little bit more than time than I thought, but thanks.
So don't you think any role of personnel department under PMO, who are basically they are managing the whole public managers community in country, after when they are come out from LBS anyway, after that their whole management is with personnel department, and the department is acting like a lay organization only, and they don't have any tight accountability, continuous training sessions. Very few are there opting for their personal training, and they going out for any distance courses, or they are pursuing for any further courses, and they are getting. But in fact, within the system, it's not completely in a as an instrument. Government of India never implied it, so that like any private firm, the HR department is doing the whole HR system management. So like this, why not the personnel department should train?
No, they have tried. I mean, this is a thought that the commission report on what they should. There have been any number of reports as to how they should improve the whole cadre management system. Nothing has come of it. That's all that I can say. But there are some negative processes. I haven't seen it from inside. I'll tell you how it actually has been working. First of all, I agree with you that the DOPT must be strengthened. Right now, if you go and see the DOPT, it's a very, very thin organization in terms of especially the part that deals with training. Much of the activities for promoting, establishment and this and that and personnel disputes and so forth, but the actual training division is very small. It should be improved. That's number one. Number two is that they, unfortunately, what has happened is that they have become some kind of recruiting agent for foreign universities. Because what's basically happened is that when we, for example, won the contract to do this phase 4, the government was in a different mood, and the government wants to cut back on sending Government of India officers for training abroad, reduce them and get them trained internally in the country. But unfortunately, the dynamics of the situation, the way they handled it, I don't want to get into critique of it, but basically, ultimately what happened after a few years, when the Government of India's foreign exchange thing was not as troubled as it was when they started thinking about it, there was a lot of pressure that we should be allowed to go abroad. And the conditions under which the students, the IAS for example, would go abroad to study were far, far, far superior than what they were given in the Indian context. So right now, they are probably sending, when we took over, they were sending about 8 people when we began this thing. Now they send more than 70 people per year on full government fellowship to get a master's degree in whatever thing. And so ultimately what's happened is they have lost their own interest as far as the IAS is concerned in strengthening local institutions more. Unfortunately, this is a much bigger story, and sometimes individuals are also involved in this thing, the way it works. But they have not made it easy. Right now also there are plenty of disputes over paying the fees to the IIMs that have tried to do these programs. In fact, IIM Ahmedabad, of course, they asked for more money because these people are also being asked to raise funds. So they said, if I'm charging 11 lakhs per year from a private sector, why should I take 2 lakh from you? You have to give me. So this battle, and so IIM Ahmedabad has shut down its program. So there is a management issue. They wanted to do it by creating other institutions, but it hasn't been a very big success. Right now, the whole training is concentrated almost completely over-concentrated in LDS. They are doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because they originally felt that we've been forgotten, we are the current. So they have now over-centralized it. And I think this model also won't work. So that's what I'm talking about training, etc. As far as cadre management is concerned, that's an much more, it's a bigger issue. I think as you rightly pointed, some Prime Minister has to take it up as a major. Manmohan Singh actually was behind this training, but Manmohan Singh is not the kind of, no Sardar Patel who would just stand up and say, I need the people to be done that way. So I think you're right that you need in this kind of thing to move the DOPT, you need absolute top thing to make a structural change, especially to change in relationship to cadre.
But I have another take on what he's saying, because when I was in ISS, 90% of my classmates were bureaucrats, and out of which 70%
You're talking about Singapore? ISS Singapore?
No, ISS in The Hague.
Oh, hey, ISS.
Yeah, and then my program was called Public Policy and Management. And so I was one of the few civil society actors, and I was thinking these people would have engaged with civil society issues or livelihoods or rural, whatever, had they not been sponsored by the UNDP to come here or something. So UNDP, UNHCR have these alliances as recruiters of two foreign universities. But I thought that's a good thing, because they would have otherwise gone and studied finance in Harvard or something like that, if they had been given a chance by the government.
See, what happened in that case, I don't know what they chose ISS Aegon. There is a hierarchy. What I'm saying is that in many cases, some of them have been told, when I said that UOPT is acting like an agent, the UOPT wants to send this year 3 people to ISS Hague, or 4 people. How many were there?
70.
No, I had
the government of India.
In my class, the class strength was 45, and we had 20 from India.
20?
Yeah. But that, yeah.
That's very large. Not all IAS. All IAS?
Yeah, so there was some.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Main point that I'm saying is that they make a commitment, and then they go and tell people that you better go to Hague because somebody else has been selected for Harvard. So you either go to Hague or you won't get a chance for the next 5 years. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but I have nothing against people getting trained. You see, in fact, we should train them. But you have a more transparent system of training. And I personally think that in these situations, the civil service going and cornering every conceivable fellowship that is obtained is very sad. Because if in any field, you find that they have basically cornered every fellowship. They know when the fellowships are being given. They are so not just there. Go to Princeton, go to any place, any subject. They're studying. Okay. Some of them can go and study, but that won't solve the bigger problem internally. And in some cases, some of them do become good. They utilize their knowledge, etc. Possibly what you're saying is that unless they were compelled to, they wouldn't go to a place where they work with NGOs. Yeah. So that means that a culture of how to deal with NGOs, that should be changed in our country. Yeah. We should elevate that.
I'm getting out of this particular debate. Yes, I agree that, but again also there are issues of using foreign trip as an incentive for training. So therefore that's a different ballgame. I think in terms of defining the ethos of the bureaucracy, 2 problems that I see. One is, I think we have made India as a general mass. I don't think that's true. Okay, working with an IAS of Madhya Pradesh cadre and working with an IAS of Andhra Pradesh cadre and a Gujarat cadre is a totally different experience. Okay. Now, also, this is historically true. I will talk about the history a bit so that I can build my second point. In Madhya Pradesh, what happened is when they were not willing to merge and all these princely states were there, what was offered by Sardar Patel is that all the princes were absorbed in ICS. So, as a result, all of them were basically, they retained that culture or the ethos of being a prince. And therefore, that has perpetuated in the Madhya Pradesh bureaucracy. And today, the second generation is actually sons of these IAS officers. A large majority of MP cadre IAS officers' sons are also becoming IAS. Because there, that hierarchical system has continued. Actually, I have seen Arjun Singh walking into the room of MS Singhdeo and not asking Singhdeo Sahib to come, because Singhdew's father was a bigger king than Arjun Singh's father, etc. So now those things have perpetuated. Now, which is very different from the Andhra bureaucracy. In Andhra, this was not permitted. Okay? And Andhra was actually that whole Madras presidency part and all that. So, and Nizam is just too big a guy to be given an IAS officer position. So, they had not tried that strategy in Andhra. So, in Andhra, therefore, the IAS officers have a very different ethos. So, therefore, I'm saying, so therefore, there is one very important point which I wanted to raise, is that I think we need to distinguish between states instead of talking about one ethos of the IAS. The second point which I wanted to bring in is therefore, I think the second very important part which has influenced our culture is this feudal relationships that existed before. Okay. The whole British bureaucracy was built on a system of mistrust. You don't trust the white and white don't trust the brown. So there's a whole lot of mistrust that were built on. Now, this feudal system has also influenced our work ethos in a very big way. Okay. And that is where these feudal, so therefore again coming back to the Madhya Pradesh example, these guys who were the princes actually know how to manage this two India that you are talking about. Because those guys are damn good at managing the unorganized sector, because that's what they have done all their life. But that is now going down with this second generation IAS officers. They don't have that skill. So, I don't know, I mean, if I'm trying to propagate feudalism, but I think some amount of that training or something we need to think about that. How do we bring that back?
No, I think so. The point that you make about culture being different in different states is very, very true, even under the same kind of rules. Every state functions, the broad structure is the framework is the same.
Exactly. But still
the same laws, etc. But and I've seen it between Kerala and Karnataka and other places. So that's very true. So that part I concede. No, but what are we going to do about it? I think there are some benefits of having an All India service. The All India service is, in some sense, a link. And in fact, that's one of the big strengths of the All India service is that everybody mentions that. The officers themselves feel very empowered because they're the only people sitting in Delhi who actually have administrative understanding of the state. If you had a pure All India service, which is only working at the central office, then you have a large number of civil servants with absolutely no understanding whatsoever of how it is to work in the states. So that is why they have justified it, and many of them actually having gone through the system, they think it's a big plus because when they're there, they have that knowledge of the state. So that's there. But otherwise, I think that many of the development functions, they have to work consistently with the realities of the state. And I think if we're trying to train like what we want to do, we should do it in such a way that they are very, very knowledgeable about the conditions of the state in which they function. The part that I do not find that convincing is the feudalism part, which may be true in certain districts, because you see the point is, it is not only a question of the IAS, the All India Service. There is the whole state services. And these people from the state services who come from much humbler backgrounds, who then get promoted, some of them I've met some of them who are promoted. They're approximately 10 or 15 years older by age to the new recruits, fresh recruits. They're in the same class because they all are, having become IAS, become the same thing. Now, those people's knowledge about the state is very, very great. And and they know the reality of it. They don't have some of the other skills. They don't have the bigger vision. They can't situate what's happening in the world, what's happening all India, what's happening other things into their, and so they lack that. So I don't think you have to go for the feudal bosses.
But these are actually representing the feudal kind of an understanding of the local area.
Whatever. I think if feudalism would be as strong in Bengal. I mean, using feudalism, but the local culture is very. If you go to Bengal, there will be another ethos.
Absolutely.
And the feudal culture is dead in Kerala.
Yeah.
Even though it was a highly princely state and all that. So the long and short of it is that yes, local knowledge is crucial, especially if you want to look for on this kind of side. That is to say, that part 2 of the thing. And we should talk about what to do about it and really work with the local knowledge. But I also think that lateral understanding of the problems of other states should be important. A guy in Kerala should know what's happening in Karnataka. A guy in Karnataka should know what's happening in Andhra Pradesh or etc. After it's one country, and I don't care if it's IAS or if it's a state service officer. But at some level, they have to represent at least a deep awareness of the all India reality that we have to survive in a federal setup. Because if we promote totally local knowledge and totally local this thing, then we become again the old problem of people not knowing, what others' problems are. They will never. I mean, right now it's bad, but imagine a situation. Can you ever solve the water dispute between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu? Even now it's impossible. But if the civil service is totally split, then it will be impossible. Anyway, I think that I see.
Some question.
I alluded to it. So I was also thinking in terms of the bureaucracy being multi-layered, in terms of having, there's a differentiation made between a higher level bureaucracy and a street level bureaucracy, which is of a very different kind. You've already alluded to that. Prior to that, I was thinking when you started with the presentation, that the ethos here seems to be also impacted by another larger ethos, which one may call a national ethos or ethos of the nation. And also when you make a reference here to the two worlds that India seems to be divided into, the idea of what makes something illegal and why one should, this whole drive towards a right kind of citizenship is really coming from an imagined idea of the nation, right? And that, if that is impacting bureaucracy, then it really is coming from outside. So in some sense, the ethos here is not mutually independent of what's happening around it, which again I think you mentioned in the context space of when you talked about how it has to be delved into the context and the ideas of democracy, etc.
I don't know if I fully understood what you're saying, but I'm answering what I think I've understood. You see, in the long run, you have to have one India, one citizenship. There's no substitute for that. It has to happen. You can't have, and there will be a movie, and the general direction of the movement is towards a rules-based governance mechanism. I mean, we're not living in Japan. So it's not a relations-based governance mechanism, it's a rules-based mechanism. There's a strong bias in our culture for copying the English system, the laws are structured in that way, etc. So broadly speaking, some of the mega features are of a particular type, and the rich India, what I'm saying, is gravitating towards that. Earlier they couldn't, now they can. They are more educated, the nature of politics is changing, their needs are different, they're more articulate, there are bigger numbers and so on and so forth. So they're making a noise. And of course the economics of it, dealing with multinationals, making money from your globalization thing, all of this is gravitating towards a homogenization. Now this homogenization, by the way, is not only an Indian phenomenon. I think it's almost impossible to resist it at the level of people who live in a world of trade and globalization. You see, you go to Singapore, I can give you an example personally. When I first went off to study, the East Asian countries had become much more globally integrated than we were. I was still in that old, the old world, very cut off from the thing. But I was stunned when I landed in Singapore and in Hong Kong. And after that, I went to Hawaii. And oh my God, here they were brown skin, yellow skins, or whatever you call the thing. But the cultural adaptation was almost completely Western. I mean, people were wearing fancy, well-cut shirts and jeans in Singapore and Hong Kong and elsewhere. Whereas we were having this old-style desi cut. I'm just giving you a kind of just cultural. So I was a total cultural misfit in my own estimation over there. In spite of the fact that I already studied English, that was not a problem at all. But culturally, consumer-wise, different. So what I can say is that in country after country, in different kind of sequences, there has been complete adaptation. Today, I don't think there's any difference whatsoever between my daughter and any other kid who's studying, which are age group, in any of the country in the world. So we have basically the global urban world has become homogenized. There's a very interesting book. I don't agree with the philosophy, but it's very difficult to neglect it. There's a man named Kenichi Omai. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a former McKinsey partner. He's got a whole bunch of books. One of them is called The Borderless World, in which he makes an argument, and he's very radical about his statements. He doesn't care. What he's trying to say, and this book was written at least maybe 15, 20 years ago. He's saying, look, the way the dynamics of the global economy is moving is that this is going to be an economy in which the economic center of gravity is going to be mega urban complexes. And there will be networks of cities, and they will be integrated. And he gives a number of example cross-national clusters. You go to Southeast Asia, you'll find Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Penang, all of them in one cluster. You go to over there, you find after some time Shanghai, Beijing, Tokyo, Seoul, they're in one kind of cluster. And what he's saying is that nations don't matter. These people are integrated, and the logic of their integration is multinational capital. And so they will create little economies for themselves. So that's basically what's going on. So to cut a long story short, the answer is that I don't think you can actually reverse the kind of quote-unquote globalized citizen that is being produced. It's not only being produced by our own Indian process, but the whole television thing, this, that, etc. So as it's evolving in that direction. What's missing is this other group. And I don't think we've got an answer for what to do with them right now, except all the developmental things that we're talking about. Bring their capability, develop this idea of citizenship, emancipate them, open them up, give them education, give them confidence, give them courage, everything that APU is doing. The foundation is doing. That's what needs to be done for some time. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
No, I was saying that what keeps them out of this other world is something beyond in some sense, the bureaucracy is not really responsible in that.
No, it's not.
Because, the sense of illegality or legality is really coming from some other.
No, what happens over there, I'm not blaming the bureaucracy for that. What I'm really saying is that if you want to read Partho's book, you will see that they survive by bribing the local policemen. They survive by the local politician becomes the dalal for this, that and the other. And here also last year the students did a project in which they went and interviewed some migrant communities, and they found that the local politicians are encouraging illegal squatting, telling them, I will get you the land.
Yeah, but what I hear him say is that also affects the ethos of the bureaucracy.
But the big bureaucracy is against it.
No, bureaucracy is not, bureaucracy is also getting influenced by this culture. Like for one of the things that I was thinking, I remember, I was taught how to fudge a logbook of a jeep by a very well-meaning IAS officer. He's a very nice fellow, and now he is doing pretty well. But he didn't think there was anything wrong in fudging a logbook.
Exactly.
Okay. Whereas when I have told that story to some other IAS officers, they have reacted very vehemently. So therefore, I think it is, they don't think there was anything wrong with it. It's okay.
I don't know how much time we have. I want to take that question, and I want wanted to raise an issue as well, which connects with what he said. But first, let's have that question.
Sir, I actually had two questions.
Yeah. Two questions.
First was more of a cynical doubt, you were talking about stewardship and, ethos and everything. But the society that we live in and the part dependency and other things that Shankar sir and they have alluded to, do you really think it is possible? And if yes, though, you suggested some things, how would you, actually expand the picture? And the second is again, when we say that officers, not only IAS, but officers per se, have become power mongers. I mean, I am surprised, why is it not, to legitimize themselves and create a moral picture of themselves amongst their group and the larger constituency. They have not, entered into populist programs or implemented them in that manner.
Again, the situation we can see with our eyes open is bad. But the problem is that I don't think you can recommend a world in which there is no good civil service. If there is you need them. You will need them for quite some time to come. And if they are to be there, they should understand what it's for. And they should understand what is the right thing to do. I'm not talking about changing those guys who are sitting in joint secretary position right now. I'm talking about those who are entering. Those who over the next 10, 20 years will be bearing responsibility. What kind of mindset should we instill and help them to grow? Ultimately, I forgot to quote from this. This question has been asked by a lot of people, and there, what happened was, what does one do in these circumstances? So, I actually quoted from Bhagavad Gita when I gave this talk in Calcutta, and I said that sometimes you have to go against the grain. You can't just ignore it. So. Let the good not worry about what the evil people are doing. Let them don't even disturb their way of thought. Is what Krishna tells Arjuna. Don't bother to change the mindset of those who are in the evil track. You do the right thing. You do the joy of good work and show them what can be done through the example of your joyful work. And therefore the answer there actually is that those who are going to go against the grain, they have to do it in this act of selfless duty. And then the only way they're going to be able to influence other people is that other people should be able to see what they do and learn from their example. And by being good example is the best way they can help change the situation. And as teachers, I think we should encourage situations where we encourage exposure to those who are doing the right thing. So that's basically all I can say in terms of what's to be done. If you take the negative view, nothing can be done, then you're killing the spirit forever. There will never be a proper civil service if that's the position you take. They're useless, they're going to change, and therefore if everybody feels that way, it will be nothing feels like failure. Just like nothing succeeds like success, nothing feels like failure. So that's the only answer, because if people who do this have to do it. The second question you asked was about why do they won't take advantage of it? Yeah, that's a good question. The thing is that the present system is preventing them from taking any credit out of good work they're doing in the that's basically it. Because they're in a career bureaucracy, they have to maintain kind of neutrality, keep quiet. They are being trained all the time to give every possible credit to the politician. And the politician would like to get any kind of political benefit for any good work that is done. And in that situation, it has become extremely difficult for civil servants who do good work to take any kind of independent credit. Whatever comes actually by chance. And unfortunately, efforts to install awards and all that is not having the required effect. Because people are at the moment not taking it well. They're getting jealous. They're beginning to question the experience, etc. So we have a kind of demoralized system. how can they, how can they get any reward except in the way the career bureaucrats accept the moral reward, that yes, I did something, that's a sense of self-satisfaction. At the moment it's like that. But if you change the structure, that's what I'm saying. If you change the structure, and then this development and work becomes much more fundamental, and you have a reward system that is based upon achievement in some ways, then that would be better. Because then someone has done good work, that person would be recognized. So that kind of thing of promotion based upon merit, where merit is defined as success in the task you have to do, is the rule. And everybody is asking that you should have more merit-based promotion. And what does it mean, merit-based promotion? Merit-based promotion must have some feedback mechanism. How do you do the job? So at the moment, the metric of what constitutes success is not good. Everybody is relying on this thing called ACR, Annual Confidential Report, which is very weak. And I think that's another area where change should come about. So some kind of objective feedback from people is essential to judge the success of a person. And they have done in other ways. For example, the report card of Public Affairs Center, in which you don't name the person, but if I am the head of BWSSB and BWSSB is ranked number 1 in my tenure, in terms of compared to other agencies, that should be a plus point. So I think we should look into the DOPT structures and make sure that good work that is done with some feedback from citizens should be incorporated into the career path. So I think that, in principle, people will not disagree with.
Do we have time?
I have no hurry. You can ask other people, maybe leave.
Okay, I'll try to focus again on the sort of issues that he was trying to raise in a very different sort of way. While I understand that cities in different parts of the world are trying to create networks of their own across nation states, the examples that you give, and that is the logic of globalization, yet it is also true that the sovereignty of the nation state has not dissolved. Namely, even today, sovereignty is pegged to the nation state. Who is sovereign? The central government in Delhi. Neither Haryana nor the UN, right? Nor South Asia or Southeast Asia or what have you. So, insofar as that is there should be some discussion in these sovereign nation states about the national ethos, about what will be the national vision of the future. But that has completely broken down because we no longer believe in the idea of civic nationalism. That is rule of law where everybody is equal rights-bearing citizen, and we think of visions for the civic nation state as we used to, as he and I closely studied, say during the national movement or during even Nehruvian times. We may disagree with Nehruvian policies, but at least they were discussed, they were critiqued, there was this sense that this nation has to go from here to here, right? So there is something called national ethos that is being publicly debated. Today nationalism has become a dirty word. Today it is associated with ethnic or religious nationalism, and a conference on communal textbooks in Karnataka held just a few days ago, right, used for the phrase saffronization or communalization of education, the phrase nationalization of education. So what I'm trying to say therefore is that if you look at nationalism so negatively, then you don't have a public discussion about the ethos of the nation. If you don't have a public discussion about the ethos of the nation, you can't have an ethos of public management either. Because the ethos of public management flows from debates about the visions of this nation.
I agree with you completely, 100%. And I wish there was a way in which we could bring it into the center stage.
So we have to reinstate nationalism to the old position of, discussing civic nation building in this country.
I completely agree, and that is very essential. I'm not sure to what extent some of these issues are a fallout of the division of responsibilities between central government and state government. When you get this national debate, anytime you mention education, That the other day I was watching Amartya Sen and Monte Carlo talking to Ronaldo. The moment education someone brought it up, Monte Carlo said, no, that's the task of the state government. See, no, I'm saying, essentially what's going on is, and there is actually a resurgent feeling of the states. My own personal feeling is the following, is that now we are living in a period of history where the state kind of will become more important. I mean, I think that the forces that will unify us as a nation, I don't see them as strongly. Why? Why? Because right now there is the industry is not a national industry; it's a global industry. Most companies over there, not only in India but all over the world, they don't think of themselves as belonging to any particular nation. They are so the big business is not an integrating force ideologically. Number one, and number two is that our labor force, our students, our young people, they don't think particularly of that kind of identity in their own nation at all. Today they are very flexible about the idea of citizenship. Tomorrow I'm in America, I'll have an American passport. If I want to come, I'll throw it away and come here, or I'll keep it, and we're making it easier and easier. So therefore I think that at many levels, the old style nationalism and national goals will not have that kind of bite as they would have, because in the olden days there was a common enemy who could fight the colonial oppressor, and therefore there was a reason to fight for it. Today, mingling with the global system is the bigger dharma. So most people everywhere, they are trying to, the economic drive is in that direction. So that, meanwhile, in the States, there's a lot of work to be done, and it has been greatly ignored, neglected, undervalued, and that work, I think we are living in a phase when that work has to be done. So the states have to develop. And I see in India, my vision of India today is that let the states show their models of development. Let them show, let them compete, because if they're successful, let them, then others will imitate. If today, people will certainly look at Gujarat and see what's happened with how much of Modi's claims vis-a-vis reality, etc. There is a debate going on. But that will be a model. If Bihar succeeds, that's another model, and etc. And I think that at the moment, that will play itself out, and we need to have a better understanding internally of what's actually going on in these countries. We have a very vague understanding. Somebody says what's happening in Bihar, we won't be able to give a really coherent answer. I may be able to say more about what's happening in the UK, then I can tell you what's happening in the economy of Bihar economy. Even Tamil Nadu, I can't tell you what's going on. So, yes, people living there, they know, but in India we don't, and we don't debate. Tomorrow I'm going to be on a panel with CII on the budget, and I think I'm going to tell them that why are you coming here and only over the national budget? Where are you when the state budgets are? Do they have major gatherings when the state budget is this thing? Why can't you be involved in the developmental work of the state? So, see, some of these things like education, health, etc., they're really laggard. And at the moment in our structure, the states are where the action is going to be. So let there be a healthy competition among the states, and in the process, I'm hoping that our identity will not break, because we will feel prouder and better being part of a more successful India. Today, if I look historically, my thing of people have been scoffing at every other state. What is the thing? My state is okay. All based upon ignorance. My state is fine. Their other state doesn't have any culture. Their language is bad. They are blah blah blah. So there is a whole cultural in the height of our nationalism. This was the problem.
Can I just more coffee?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So I was just thinking that maybe there should be some studies of how the public managers worked in South Korea in the last 20 years, or Brazil, and even let's say Soviet Russia. I mean, do you know of such studies? I mean, it would be more relevant to India probably, or Indonesia.
I myself have studied the Korean
And the US example might not be the most important.
Because project management is evolving.
Right.
But there is quite a bit of interest in what other countries have done. Actually, let me tell you a little bit quickly. In terms of, I always thought. See, when the reform started, my personal thing was that what we need is to increase state capacity. And what better place to learn from than the countries where they have used the state to really get ahead, and that was East Asia. So I was, started thinking about this issue under the shadow of the East Asian miracle. And so I have studied very closely, in fact, particularly the Korean case, because that was more comparable to the others. Now, two things have happened. One of course, whenever we start talking about these things, the usual, what you now said about America will be said that, look, it's not relevant. I mean, that we are X country, they are Y country, we are 1.2 billion, there are so many million. So why talk about Singapore, why talk about this, etc. That's one line. But the other interesting thing is that you can't draw lessons in quite exactly the same way. You can draw some lessons, but for today's purpose, it wasn't relevant. Over there, what has happened in Korea, for example, if I give the example, is a situation where Korea has started out with a state which was extremely effective under a dictator, Park Chung-hee. And that dictator basically kicked the economy into shape. It was very ruthless. But he got the business to work under him. There were projections, there were visions about what they want to do. We must do this, achieve, etc. 5-year plans that were very, very successful, etc. So Korea became developed. But as Korea became developed, they couldn't hold that structure. So what usually happens is, and it's a threat here as well, is that once these big businesses become very, very big, they cannot anymore be controlled. And so the Korean state, to make a short story, dissolved under the power of the big business. And in fact, even when Park Chung-hee was alive, and just a little more after he was dead, big business, the independent bureaucracy, the planning commission, economic planning board, was bypassed, and all decisions were being made in the in the president's Blue House. So there was another separate cadre of bureaucrats working directly under the president, who was favoring some of the top this thing. Now, in some parallel, we could have told another story on that. Today was not the reason for it, but you can see that this is the direction in which some countries have gone. So today, it's not about public management in the way we talk about it, because the democracy factor is rather weak in Korea. I wanted to bring about issues of accountability, democracy, what to do, etc., etc. But those guys have licked the problem by having an early start in education and then being able to implement a very rapid growth process, which was cruel in many ways. Actually, I read a fantastic novel, you should read this novel, called by this woman who won this Asian Booker Award or whatever it's called. It's called Looking for Mom or Crying for Mom. Please look for Mom. You should read that book. It's a very interesting book which describes the changing society of Korea in the period of rapid growth, and especially what happened to women in this transformation. But the main story is that they were able to very quickly become developed economically without some of the other, because they had the education background. So now, what am I going to say about Korea? What can we learn about Korea?
I think if Korea is not the right example, maybe Indonesia is or Brazil is.
Maybe. That's very true.
They have had some degree of democracy.
Correct. That's always the important thing to look at. But East Asia, I know a little bit. Brazil and other places are different. In the Latin American countries, they don't have cadre bureaucracies. The bureaucracies over there come with the president and go with the president. So a whole army of people leave the thing with the party loses. And it comes all the way down. Even the city bureaucrats will get transformed. So that's a model of Latin American civil services are a model that's totally different. They're not a cadre bureaucrat. So friends, thanks a lot and thanks for your patience.
Yeah, thank you for
Lovely talk and thanks a lot. And I know that most people don't work in these areas, but I hope at least